And welcome to the Two Unlikely Christians podcast. I am recovering slacker Pat McCool and comedian. And now across the Atlantic Ocean to the beautiful British Isles, to the man who once stole David Beckham's first girlfriend at a London rave just to prove that he could, renowned psychotherapist and addiction specialist, Richard Pearl.
Thanks, Pat. What an intro, man. I mean, like, just for like context, and this may be hard to believe, yeah, but back in the 90s when David Beckham was, making his splash, and appearing on the scene, I was not in a position to be stealing anyone's girlfriend. It may be hard to believe, Pat, but actually back then I wasn't that cool.
Which makes it more amazing that you did.
Yes. Yes, Pat.
That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
That's your reality, Pat. Yes,
I live in my world, Richard.
Yeah, my role is to understand your reality and not force mine on you. So, however distorted or disturbed that may be. So but no,
it's all working for me. So, I panicked just a minute ago because, So you guys fall back in time?
Yeah, we fell back in time. Yeah, our clocks went back. Yeah.
Well, that's what happens. You know what I mean? We pop it back an hour.
Oh, it's simple.
I'm in the bathroom. And my wife yells at me. She says, "Does England change their time like we do? Because if not, you better get up into the studio because you're about to be late." And I went into full-fledged panic because I didn't know if you guys did the same thing we did.
Yeah, we travelled back in time over the weekend. Yeah.
Are you a fan of going? Are you a fan of the darker days or the lighter days?
Well, there's an argument, right, that the time change is supposedly to support farmers, right? So they get more light at the start of the day. But I'm not a farmer, so what that means is that it gets dark much earlier, or an hour earlier, and then obviously it continues to get earlier and earlier as we progress into the winter. So I don't love it. I'm not someone that deals amazingly. I prefer having more sunshine. It's better for my mental health. But it is what it is, isn't it? It is what it is. You can't do too much about it.
I didn't think of the mental health, but I like it. The darker the days, that's good for me. The sooner it can get dark, I can close the curtains, pop up into bed. I'm the only person I know that's like this. but I literally like, and the whole moving the time up to give farmers more time makes zero sense because the farmer just has to get up when the sun comes up. We have a saying over here. It's called "I work from can to can't," or in the South we say "can't." So can't. We're working can to can't. But you get up in the morning when what difference to what the clock says? The sun comes, you have the same amount of daylight.
Yeah.
Just get up. Don't say, well, the daylight, if they would move that time back, I would go ahead and get up an hour earlier. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense. But I am one of the few outliers that, I got a little Dracula in me, I guess.
Yeah, well, thinking about it as well, and I know that obviously it's not uncommon for me on this podcast to poke a little bit of fun at the culture that you live in, but in that part of having spent time in Mississippi when we, as you know, Pat, when we met, actually the summers for you guys are like they're pretty unpleasant, like with the humidity and typhoons and and all this kind of stuff. So like I can actually understand the attraction of winter, whereas here like our weather goes, and we actually had quite a nice summer. Summer we can really enjoy summer here, for the most part. So I can understand why winter and darker and cooler may be a little more attractive to you than it is to us.
Does get 7 degrees. I just don't like it getting dark at 8 or 8:30. I like to go ahead and slide up in the rack. So anyway, let's get on to our topic, and welcome to everyone that's joining us. And today we want to talk about have no fear, God is near, because I believe the majority of people go through life anxious. They go through life with fear. They go through life always expecting something bad to happen. God didn't make us to live that way. He gave us everything we need to trust him. He's shown us all through our lives to trust him over and over again. And this is an important thing for people to master to live a much better life. And as I said once before, fear not is said over and over in the Bible, that God tells us to fear not. It is not said 365 times, which I said in an earlier episode. I should have researched that because, as Albert Einstein once posted online, that half of what you read on the internet is just made up. So 365 times is not true, but it's 74 times in the King James Version to be exact. But there's a reason that it is said over and over and over. And if you pause with me 1 second. But it's said so many times because fear is the opposite of faith, and learning to trust God in all aspects of our lives is one of the most important things we can do to live a life of peace and joy. And the repetitive verses are there to offer reassurance and emphasize that God is in control, always present in our lives. As he says in Isaiah 41:10, God says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God." Right there, he's saying, do not fear. I'm your God. I am always with you. What are your thoughts on that, Rich?
I mean, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, I find it hard to be, to live in complete, to live by faith alone. I met this woman, I was at church a couple of weeks ago, and they had a lady who was leading a mission in Guatemala. And the mission itself, it was working with kids from, hard backgrounds. And the mission itself was funded by a charity, but her presence over there, her living situation, her housing, her food, her water, her electricity was not funded, and she lived entirely on faith. So like somehow for the whole duration of her time over there, she'd been over there for some years. She was everything that they needed had like come to them somehow. Like and the house had turned up, the money for this had turned up, money for that had turned up, like, and she lived completely on faith, right? And I just thought that was so amazing, like to be able to do that is really, is something I don't embody, but that kind of absence of fear and the presence of that kind of faith I found incredibly inspiring. I think that you look at the disciples, in the boat when the storm blows up, and Jesus just quiets the storm. And I think that's the metaphor for what we're talking about, really, is that, like, if we've got that faith, then the storm, it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It doesn't have to be a scary thing. And, and what I try and do more so, and sometimes I'm better at it than others, but when there's uncertainty, so, we went through a bit of an uncertain period in my home recently where my other half was, her employment situation became quite unstable, and actually what I was able to do and she was able to do, and we were able to prompt the other to do it when, when we were, maybe one of us was struggling with it, it's just like, do you know what, it's okay. Like we'll be okay, we'll be provided for. And actually things have turned out for the good very much. So, but yeah, so basically what I'm saying, I don't find it a really easy thing to do every single moment of every single day, but it is, having that faith and not being, dominated with anxiety about what might happen or what might not happen or what could happen or what's going to happen. I do have something to like return to. I can return to my faith. I can remind myself, oh, okay, it's all right. It's going to be okay. Going to be okay. So those are initial thoughts, Patrick, emanating from the large brain that you believe that I have.
Largest brain south of Hadrian's Wall. And you brought up a point that I didn't really think about because I was trying to relate things back into my life. The woman you're talking about kind of had no choice. Maybe, I mean, I've been in situations in my life when I had no choice. So, it could possibly be that we turn and completely trust God when we don't really have any choice. But the more comfortable our lives get, maybe the easier we get, the more these fears we pop up in, that we pop up into our head. Because if this woman doesn't have any choice, she's not over there just making up an irrational fear that they may not have uh, food, or them, because they may not. She doesn't know where it's coming from. She's just literally having to trust God to provide, and he does it over and over again. And then when he does it over and over again, it solidifies you. That's what's happened in my life. In my life, we'll talk in a minute. The more he's done it, the more you've seen it happen, the more it gets into your mind, the more it gets into your heart that you know God is there. But it's one of the most difficult things that we do in life. I don't know if it's human nature. I don't know if it's just Satan that's attacking us doing this. I don't know where the fear came from. Um, but it's a real thing that everybody has. And if they can learn to master that, you can live in a lot better peace. I know I am in far, far better shape than I used to be in that regard because of what I've learned. Is there any kind of clinical aspect do you see in your practice, when you're talking to people with addictions and in therapy where they're afraid of things or scared? I know it's not a spiritual thing, but do, do you see where fear plays into people's lives that might affect them in addiction, might affect them in some of the problems they're having in their lives?
I mean, yeah, for sure. There's so many different ways to slice that up. So, I mean, if you come from that 12-step kind of AA, NA perspective, I've heard addiction referred to as a fear-based illness. There's a bit in the Narcotics Anonymous literature where it talks about, when you strip back the symptoms of the disease of addiction, what you'll find underneath is a swamp of self-centered fear. So it's referring, fear that's all based around the self. Oh, I won't have. What about, what about me? I'm not going to get. What if this happens to me? So yeah, I mean, fear plays a massive role in it. I mean, when people are carrying trauma, they will project or distort their reality and see things differently because of their past experiences, and so things might appear scarier than they really are. Anxiety it goes hand in hand with addiction. Anxiety, depression, and addiction. They're also closely kind of entwined and come along together. And for some people, they might be medicating the anxiety or the depression. For other people, the anxiety and depression is much more purely a result of their addiction and the impact that it has on the brain, and so on and so forth. So, it's live in the therapy room for sure. From a cognitive behavioural perspective, you would perhaps sit with someone and get them to analyse their fears, start to think about them. How likely is this going to happen? Has it happened before? What evidence do you have that this is going to happen? And there may be some evidence that it's going to happen, but there's probably lots of evidence that it won't. So, yeah, fear, fear, anxiety, all of those things definitely kind of very much alive and present in the therapy room for sure.
Followers of Jesus are equipped with something to overcome that fear and
Yeah.
wipe out that fear. Because it just seems like most everything we fear is actually irrational. 99% of the things you thought were going to go, or probably even more, don't actually happen. But we bring up fear. It, in our mind, we create a lot of it. It's like I remember when I first became a comedian. I had the fear of public speaking just like everybody else. And for
Mm,
whatever reason, think about the fear of public speaking. I mean, nobody can physically hurt you, but
mm,
we're all scared of it. So to me, that's an irrational fear. Before I went on stage the very first time, 2 weeks, I was just doing a 5-minute open mic in front of people that would never see me again. It
mm.
was at a pretty nice club, but I was sick to my stomach for like 2 weeks. I wasn't even talking to people. My daughter looked at my wife one time, like, what's wrong with him? Just leave him alone. I get over to this place. I get to the hotel and I'm trying to drink a cup of coffee, and my hand was literally doing that. For the people listening, my hand was just shaking and coffee was spilling out the cup. I was so I was so frightened of this fear. And I had spoke, when I was in the corporate world for 20 years, I'd had to get up and speak a lot of times, and I was always nervous about that, but it always worked well. But I was just very nervous about it. And I get over to the place and I started praying. I walked in like, God, help me get through this. And when they announced my name, when I got back there, it was kind of like with the hand grenade. Remember with the hand grenade, I told you how nervous I was. I heard the
Yeah.
boom, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I really want to be John Wayne." And then when I got the hand grenade in my hand, all of a sudden this complete calm came over me. I'm like, "There's no way I'm messing this up." It was the same way. All of a sudden, a calm came over me. They announced my name. I stepped out. Somebody, a place 3.5 hours away from me, went, "Yay, Pat!" Like they knew me, like I had fans there. And all of a sudden, kind of gave me a calm. I got to the microphone. My leg was shaking. My right leg, kind of doing an Elvis. You know how Elvis, gave a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah.
of a uh, they obviously couldn't see it because the owner of the club later said, "Yeah, you looked really relaxed, and you got good stage presence." I'm sitting there thinking I was mortified. But anyway, I calmed down, did 5 minutes. That place exploded. It was almost like God carried me out onto the stage. I still refer to it sometimes like, "God, thank you for carrying me out on that stage." The point was, I was just mortified. I mean, probably one of the scaredest I've been in my life to walk up and talk to people. And it was all basically irrational. I mean, it didn't warrant that kind of fear. And that's kind of a stretch of an analogy for most people in their lives. But I think everything that people fear in life, most everything that they think that they're constantly worrying about is something irrational. Do you see it that way? Do you see that it's irrational?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things we can be scared of that are irrational. Not all of them. Like, fears, emotions evolve. Like they're evolutionary. Like they serve their purpose. Like anger gets a bad rap, but actually anger is what tells us like something's not right. It's not okay for us. Our boundaries have been crossed, but it gets out of hand and becomes problematic. But we need some anger. Guilt and shame also get a bad rap. But actually imagine a world without guilt and shame, right? Like when no one had any guilt and no one had any shame, they're like uh they're emotions that really govern human behaviour. And if we lived in a guiltless, shameless world, then people would just do exactly what they wanted all the time. With their most base human animal instincts, would they be acting upon them, right? So they're important emotions to have, and fear is as well. And we evolve to feel fear. Fear of public speaking, in my opinion, that's about needing to belong. Like we evolved to belong, we evolved to be in groups, right? Like, if we are in groups, tribes, yeah, keeping it biblical, right? If we're in tribes, when the other tribe comes along or when the animals come along that want to try and eat us, if we're in groups, we have a much better chance of survival than if we're an individual, right? So we're kind of evolved to belong. So that fear that one might feel in public speaking is like, whoa, if I get this wrong, yeah, or whatever wrong meant, or if I bomb on stage and these people are going to reject me, right? And if they reject me, then I'm not part of the group. So that's why that's very scary for people, for many, right? So I can't remember exactly where we started, Pat, but like yes, right. So fear a completely irrational thing? Not always, but often, often it's irrational, you know.
Reminded me of something when you're saying that, because I think it's fear of embarrassing yourself. Because now that I think about it, going back to childhood, we all embarrassed ourselves as children. And you remember how mortifying that was when everybody laughed at you? Not like
Yeah, yeah,
laughing
yeah.
at you at a comedy club, but when that happened, boy, that was probably one of the worst things that ever happened in your life.
Yeah,
To me,
I still got memories seared into my brain of those kind of things, like for sure. Like when you're a kid. Absolutely.
yeah, I didn't really think about that. But the fear of the public speaking was a little bit of a side joggle, but that is a really good point. I didn't really think about that. But a lot of times we go through, we're afraid of embarrassing ourselves, which is, and I didn't think about the whole group thing. But in general, though, people fear things. If it's financial things with family, things going wrong, and to me, in many cases, for the Christian, it's a complete lack of trust in God. It's putting your faith in God and realizing He's there, realizing He's able to He's going to take care of us, and we're going to come through it okay. Uh, is a way to eliminate the fear or really tamp it down. And a lot of times, fear, in my opinion, can cause problems that wouldn't have happened. I mean, it can cause us to be deceitful. Even in marriages, things like the fear of sometimes telling people the truth, for
Yeah.
example. Um, One, like in business, as I've mentioned to you before, when I was in the corporate world, when I was a believer in God, but I wasn't a follower in Jesus, and I wasn't letting the Holy Spirit take control of me and my thought process, wasn't putting my trust in God. Something came up on a business deal, boy, whatever it needed to come out of my mouth just came out. And my wife would be like, "Is that true?" I'm like, "Well, not exactly, but it's like, well, you're not putting your trust in God. You're thinking that you got to bend the truth to get what you're trying to get." Which, that to me, if you're lying in life in any way, shape, form, or fashion, that is a display of a lack of trust in God, in my opinion. And it can also lead to things like in marriage, not telling bad news about a child, or about I don't mean bad news. I mean, there's just things that you hold back, or you don't want to say, or something that's financial and you hold it back. And then, whereas if you just always told the truth, were upfront, put your faith in God that He's always going to take care of everything, you're going to have that peace. Because when you're being a little deceitful, or you're holding back information, it's eventually going to blow up. It's eventually going to cause a problem. And a lot of times, the problem of not telling the truth, not being straightforward, is going to be a lot bigger than what the original problem was. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, I agree. I think we can often be the architects of our own doom, and we can often create the very thing we're trying to avoid. Like I often come back to, you'll get a pattern in relationships where, say, one partner's very insecure and, like, frightened of, that the other partner's going to leave them or cheat on them, or whatever it might be. So the frightened partner, the insecure one, is constantly, where are you going, who are you with, who's that on the phone, and then what that does is it actually pushes people away. And, so you can kind of end up in that serious struggle. Well, if I'm being accused of doing all these things, then I might as well. It's a very simple example. There's a line, right? It's from Matthew, and it echoes through my head sometimes when I'm, like, wrapped up in, look, but financial insecurity is a thing for me, and it doesn't make any sense. It is irrational, without, but, like, God, my, in terms of,
Sorry, did you say financial insecurity?
yeah, financial insecurity, it's
Yeah.
like, I can get kind of bogged down in, you
Well,
know,
it's in your brain because you've been there. You've been broke.
yeah, I've been broke, and I work for myself, and still, like you, Pat, like, one day the phone might stop ringing, right? But, um,
I've been in,
uh,
not to cut you off, but I've been in situations. Oh yeah, the biggest thing in a person's mind is a fear of all of a sudden not being able to provide, not having things. The point was, I've had examples over and over and over where there were moments like that throughout my life, but God came through in just these incredible ways, just like you're talking about the woman down in South America over and over. But those fears come from, like being embarrassed as a child, those fears come from, we have been there.
yeah.
Go
And
ahead.
then the line of the of scripture that always echoes through my head is, like, where Jesus says to the disciples, "Are you still so dull? Are you still so dull?"
Right.
It's like, don't you get it yet? Like, it's like, I brought you this far, right? Like, don't you get it yet? Like, you're gonna be okay. And I really believe that. And I don't think okay always looks like what we want it to look like. Yeah, but, like, I'll be okay. A friend of mine, a guy, a real kind of old timer in my recovery world, my 12-step recovery world. Interesting guy, lovely guy. I've spent a lot of time with him over the years, and he had some, issues around money and stuff. He was a bit of a compulsive spender, and all that kind of stuff. But he said, he said this beautifully simple thing to me, and he said, when I get wrapped up in the fear around money, and I think about my relationship with God, it's like I've always been looked after. Right? I said, I might not have had everything I wanted, but I've always had a roof over my head. I've been able to get a hot meal, and I've always had somewhere to sleep, and that's it. And it's like, so it's like being, whatever okay is, it might not look like what I want it to look like. It might not have the zeros at the end of it. Like I want, but it's like it's like, are you still so dull? Like, don't you get it yet? And it's like it's having that faith. I've been in John 6 a bit recently, right? And there's this, I read it. I got really stuck into it. And I read it over and over and over again, and it's where like Jesus, he feeds the 5,000, right? And then he has a little wander about on the water, sails about a bit, and the crowds follow him, right? And he says to him, like, because they're like, Rabbi, where have you been? And teacher, where have you been? And he's like, well, you lot are only here. I've got it here. All right. Let me see if I can just find it quickly. Yeah, they found him on the other side of the lake. They said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Jesus answered them, very truly, I tell you, you're looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. And I really kind of looked into that, right, and kind of meditated on it, I suppose. It's like sometimes or I speak for me, it's like I want to, well, like, Jesus must have my back because look at all these things I've got. Look at my nice new house and my nice car and, blah, 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 right? But actually, that's not, having faith in him and knowing it will be all right is about having faith in him, not what he can, might, or will do for us. But if you've got that faith, you'll be all right. I know I'll be all right. It might not be all right like I want it to be, but I know that I'll be all right. And that's, I think that's what it really, when you boil it down to like its essence, that's what this is about, right? It's like, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know I don't need to be scared of it. Yeah, that's what I think. And I think when we live in this, like, I think the reason we get so, in the West, maybe we get so focused on the loaves is because we're surrounded with them, right? We have a lot, we have a lot of loaves, and even people. Of course, there's poverty in my country, there's poverty in your country, but our idea of what poverty is very different to what it might be in another country, right? In other parts of the world, right? And I was reading this article recently, it was about an African country, and there were these guys, there was a revolution in this country. They locked a lot of people up, a lot of, like, people that, post the revolution they were like the enemy. Like, they were on the wrong side of things, right? And they locked them all up in these makeshift cells. And, like, they'd have 30 of them in this tiny room, like the size of the room that we're in now. They didn't even have room to lie down. They're just in there, all squashed in like sardines. And they were singing psalms. That's what they just sung psalms, that's what they lived on. That kind of faith, and that's being, that's living on faith. Do you know what I mean? It's like being willing, to have that kind of faith in Jesus. And it's like, I'll be okay, might not be what I want it to be, but I know that I'll be okay if I've got faith in Jesus, And that comes up for me talking about this.
And that's a great way to end it, because that's it. Again, I think a lot of times the more comfortable we have, the more fears we bring up in our heads.
Exactly
that we create all these in our mind, when God has given us, just like the woman in South America, she didn't have any choice. She relied on God, and always happened. The reason why I feel like I have a little experience here, because I've had moments and I can remember laying down in the bed going, God, you're all I have. And then a voice came to me, not a loud voice, but I heard, this is all you need. And I've had many situations where I thought this isn't going to work out, and it didn't work out. What did work out actually turned out to be a lot better. The main thing is God has you. God is here, and he's here in our lives. And if you can put your faith, it's not easy to do. This is what we're talking about. Everybody has it. Me and you have it. We just have it a lot less because we put our faith in God, and we're quick to go back to the word of God and think about the things. I personally just have such a track record of him being in my life and taking care of me, and everything working out good, and most of the time working out even better. And like you said, you're always taken care of. So people listening, I just hope you get encouraged by that. And just remember, just remind yourself of all the times you were afraid. and something didn't happen, because that goes to everybody that's listening. If you look back on your life, you've been afraid of things over and over again that did not happen, or when it didn't happen, as we talked about, it worked out fine, and
Yeah.
all you did was made yourself miserable, and you're kind of showing God you don't fully trust him. And the more you show God you trust him, the more you're going to feel his peace in your life. And you can do that and show you trust him by praying and talking to him on a daily basis. Just fill your head with what he tells us in that instruction manual called the Bible. And there are so many verses in there, and we'll just leave with a few of them. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Again, he's saying, I am right there with you. It's just up for you to acknowledge his presence and know that everything's taken care of. John 14:27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. And once again, do not be afraid. And 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. And think about that. He gives us power. He wants us to be bold. He wants us to be strong in our faith. And we let these things in our mind come in that aren't really rational, and we should live in strength. We should live in power. Um, Choose faith over fear. And that's the way to go through life, and make sure your life is filled with peace and joy and not anxiety and stress, which is what we're trying to help people do there, Rich. And we will wrap it up and leave it there. Do you have any final thoughts?
Just from the sermon at church last night, there was the preacher, the pastor. He said this thing that really stayed with me, and I think it's relevant. He said, like, prayer isn't a practice; it's a posture. You know, and it's like it's a posture of the heart. You know, so it's like when these things come along, can we turn to him? You know, like, is that, you know, can we make that our first reaction? You know, like, okay, this is happening, or it could happen, or it might happen. Okay, turn to him. You know, this has happened, it could happen, it might happen. Okay, can you turn to him? You know, can we develop that as a reflex? You know, and I thought that was really cool. And then the other thing I would say is, you know, for those who are involved or, you know, have some knowledge of the 12 steps, you know, the third step is like, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him, you know, and it talks about, you know, some of the 12 step literature, it says, you know, we make this decision as often as we need to. You know, we might need to make it multiple times a day, but it's just like, do I believe that I'm in the care of? Yeah, I do. So, yeah, that's me, Pat. That's what I got. That's what I got for you, brother.
That's all we need, because those are excellent points. And I hope everybody listening can remember what Richard just said. That is, make it your reflex. You make it your reflex to trust God, and you'll find that peace and joy and start eliminating that fear and that anxiety. All right, Rich, see you next time, man. Y'all take care over there.
Patrick, happy hunting. See you later.